Now I've said that to you about spirit, carnal. Let's put that into perspective. If it's possible to take a thought captive, that implies that there's a part of you that is separate from your thoughts, right? It has to be. If you are not separate from your thoughts, how can you take the thought captive? Hey folks, welcome back to video number 2 in the series. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some practical techniques and illustrate the concept of raising your consciousness. Now, there are many things that can help, and what's important though is that you understand what you're trying to do. So now many people will not have, or I don't know how many people, but a certain amount of people won't have an understanding of what I'm even talking about. So I'm going to actually do a little experiment with you in a moment. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to tell you afterwards after the experiment has happened. So the thing is that right now I have your attention. Now there's nothing wrong with the video. Now what I just did there is I deliberately paused for a long period of time because I want to illustrate something. I didn't want to warn you ahead of time, but I want to illustrate something. Next time around you're going to be ready for this, and I want you to be now, next time around, be aware of how you felt. But let me try and bring to your mind, looking back on that moment when I stopped talking, what happened in your mind? Now, in most cases, and if it didn't happen this way with you, please text me and I'll talk to you about ways to get around this, or other methods on this video will help you. But what usually happens, because I have your attention, because someone or something has your attention, there's no room for your mind to be in crazy thoughts and thinking about this and worrying and lost in thought. There's no room for that because you're focused on what I'm saying. Hopefully you were. But the moment I stopped talking, that created a moment of peace, because your mind was attentive for the moment. And it's like your mind was in a mode where you were observing and listening to what I was saying, but then I just stopped. Now, after maybe a few seconds, your mind would have kicked in and said, oh, is YouTube broken? What's he doing? This and that. But for a moment, there was peace. Okay? Now, that moment, I want you to remember back to how that felt, if you can. That moment is a very interesting moment because what it does is it gives you kind of a taste of what it feels like to have peace in your mind. Now, a caveat to this, a very important point, is I'm not suggesting to you that you block all your thoughts and you don't think. That's not what I'm suggesting to you. The peace has to come naturally, and it has to come from a raising in consciousness where you're in a relaxed place in your mind, and your mind doesn't feel the need. Very important, let me say that again. Your mind does not feel the need to work everything out, because the only reason you use your mind to work everything out is because you live from your mind. You live from the conceptual ideas that your mind comes up with. And as I've established in part 1, and if you have not watched part 1, please watch part 1, your conceptualization can be flawed. And 9 times out of 10 is flawed. 99 times out of 100 is flawed because it's a natural thing it's just the way our brains work. So that's why I did that. I wanted to give you a moment of experiencing that peace. Now, what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm not going to tell you when, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to suddenly stop talking, and I want you to become aware, because I've now told you I'm going to do it, okay, and you're paying attention to me right now, pay attention to me right now, listen to every word I'm saying. When I basically stop talking in a moment, I want you to stay consciously aware of your brain, and it's almost like you need to look, almost feel and sense what's happening in this sort of central portion of your brain, if possible. Just watch it as if, imagine that you're sitting on a riverbed, watching a river, and you're watching the river flow by you. Okay, it's just flowing by. There's nothing to think about. You just watch the river. That's what I want you to do with your mind. Now, what you'll see, hopefully, is as you do that, your mind will start trying to talk. Okay, and there's nothing to talk about. It's just a moment of peace. So just watch out for that. So anyway, as I say, I will just suddenly stop talking in a moment and just try and do that. So the interesting thing about these techniques now, you may have just experienced the first piece of peace, first piece of peace that you have for a long time in your mind. Okay, so this is a slightly different form of peacefulness, though. It's really a metaphoric demonstration. Okay, but it very much is like that. And just look. If me talking right now is not good for you, just pause me and just ponder for a moment what happened in your mind when I stopped talking. Did you feel anxiety? Did you feel like an anxiety? Very often people feel an anxiety. In fact, this is actually a technique that salespeople will use. And you've probably had it happen to you, where a salesperson is talking and talking and talking, and then they hit you with the end pitch, and then they don't say a word, and they just sit there and look at you. Now that creates a lot of tension in people because people aren't used to that. But that's a side point, It's and then you end up speaking first, and you give all the power over to the salesperson. That's what that technique is designed to do. But anyway, the point of this first part of this video, which is very strange, me sitting here staring in the camera, is just to give you a taste. Okay, so that's number one. Let's move on to technique number two. That wasn't really a technique number one, but you can try doing that. Actually, sorry, before I move on, I used to see Buddhist people, or I think they're Buddhist. I'm not sure what they are. You ever seen those guys? They have the little bell, or they have a bell and they go ting, and they ting the bell. And I used to think, what on earth are those people doing? Like, what possible spiritual value does a bell ringing have? That's a valid question. I used to think, what on earth are they doing? It's like they're so lost in their minds, they think a bell ringing is going to do something spiritual. It's just a vibration in the air. Okay, that was kind of until I understood what the purpose of the bell ringing is. And I don't do this myself. I do it in other ways, but it makes the point again. What the point of the bell ringing is in these kind of, I believe it's Buddhism, it may be used elsewhere, is that it starts with a loud noise and it slowly fades away. Now, because it takes your attention, initially your brain hears the ding and then it fades off. What happens there is that as the sound fades away, your brain follows it, but the attentiveness in which your brain was initially engaged in the sound remains as it goes to silence. And it kind of brings you into a moment of stillness. So that's what actually the purpose is, kind of cool and kind of interesting of those bells. It's not just the ringing sound, it's following the ringing sound into the silence. That's the point of those bells. So just once again, as far as I'm concerned, that's like a conceptual metaphor of what true peace is like. That does get you into peace because it quietens your mind, but you can't walk around all day tinging a bell, right? Or you can't walk around all day blocking your thoughts, blocking your mind. You just can't function that way. So it's a moment of practice. It's a moment of understanding. It's an illustration. Okay, so number two. So number two is something I'm going to strongly, strongly recommend that you start to do. Okay, and it's the word is, once again, as I talked about in part one, the word is steeped in baggage. Okay, and it's the word meditate. Now, the meditation that I want you to go and do, I'm going to have a link in the description below this video. It is a meditation that's only 7 minutes long. There is a longer version of this meditation which you can find by the same man. The person's name is Roy Masters, and as I say, I'm going to put the link below. But I want to explain to you how this meditation works and what it's designed to do, because people very easily misuse these types of meditation. Now, the first very important point about this form of meditation is it is not designed to block your thoughts. It is not, and I emphasize not designed to block your thoughts. It's not designed to quieten your mind. It's not designed to take over. It is purely similar, in speaking metaphorically, similar to going to the gym and lifting weights. Okay, you're building up a muscle. Then this meditation is designed to give you a moment of objectivity to your thoughts so that you can therefore watch a thought before it takes over. That's what this meditation is designed to do. Link below, as I said. Now, I'm going to just talk around this a little bit because I've given people this meditation before and they don't get it. They don't understand it. It's because there's no explanation with it. So I'm going to give you some metaphors, and for you Christian folks, or biblical folks, or whatever, I'm going to give you a scripture as well. Okay, and here's the scripture. Let's start with the scripture. It's kind of it's a very good scripture. The Apostle Paul, or Paul Tarsius rather, he said somewhere. He said, take every thought captive. Take every thought captive. Okay? Now, people don't really understand what that means. But let me break that down for you to prove a point. The point I want to prove is that there is an observer. Inside you, there is an observer. And I believe that is your spirit. Okay? That is your spirit. Your spirit is the observer. And that spirit, when your consciousness is raised, when you're within that spirit, that's what a raising of consciousness really is. You sit in your own spirit in an observation sort of place. That spirit is in union with the Father. That spirit is of the Father and the Father is of it. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is within you. That's your spirit. That spirit is from God. That spirit is an observer. Your thoughts and your mental processes are part of your physical carnal mind. Now, I don't mean carnal in a negative way. I just mean it as a descriptive word. Okay? You are flesh. Your brain is flesh. There's a fleshy process, electrical pulses and all the rest of it going on in your brain. That's your brain. Okay? Now, there is a belief that memories and things like that are not stored in your brain. They're stored in what's known as the quantum field, and so on and so forth. That's a whole other thing for another subject. Just thought I'd throw it in there for your interest. But your brain, your physicality, is different from your spirit. Now, when Paul says, take every thought captive, now I've said that to you about spirit, carnal. Let's put that into perspective. If it's possible to take a thought captive, that implies that there's a part of you that is separate from your thoughts, right? It has to be. If you are not separate from your thoughts, how can you take the thought captive? Because it doesn't say, see, most people will say, no, Paul's saying, think about something, then think about the thought. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say, think about your thoughts. He didn't say, think something, then think about the thinking. Because that's more of the same. He said, take your thought captive. Take it and captivate it. Captive. Take it captive. It's a metaphoric language. How do you take your thought captive? Well, let's think for a second. If you believe I think, therefore I am, as in part 1, please watch it if you haven't. If you believe in I think, therefore I am, therefore you believe that your thoughts are the truth, that your thoughts are your only reality. Therefore, if that's true and your thoughts are completely distorted and completely corrupted, then and you know you're an angry person, or you're addicted, or you're traumatized, then those thoughts are who you are, and therefore you are traumatized. You are, angry. You are addicted. You can't get out of it. Okay, but what I'm saying to you is there's a possibility, which Paul talks about, to take those thoughts captive and have them here, and that your spirit is here. Essentially, I'm just using visual metaphor. Your spirit is here, and your spirit is the observer of your thought. Now, you may have experienced this, but you never knew what it was. Have you ever said to yourself, why was I thinking that? What on earth made me think that? A different version of it, but it's the same sort of process. Why did I say that? Why did that fly out of my mouth? Okay, now I know that's happening post the event, but I still believe that that illustrates the fact that you have the ability to look at a thought and be puzzled by it. Because when you say, why did I think that? Where did that thought come from? The fact that you can even say that proves that you are not your thoughts. Now you could say, well, that was a thought thinking about another thought. Okay, maybe you could make that case. That would be a hard one to argue against, because you if you're going to look at it completely physical, and that's all you're going to look at, then I can't argue with you on that. I'd have to agree with you in the physical realm. But what I'm saying here is that you're stepping out of the physical into the spiritual, into your spirit, and I'm saying to you there's an ability that you have that you may not be aware of right now, and this meditation will cultivate to sit in your spirit and literally observe your mind as if it's someone else, essentially. As if. Be very careful. I said as if it's someone else. As if you're studying another person. A bit like this. You can be in a room and you can watch another person. It's very easy to watch other people and see all their faults and see all their strange ways, isn't it? Very easy. You can look at someone and see exactly what's wrong with them very quickly. You need that way cultivated in yourself. But the separation in yourself needs to be between your physical and your mental mind, your mental processes, and your spirit that sits back and observes your mental processes. Now, what does this give you? Very important. What does this give you? Excuse me. This is what the meditation is going to help you gain, excuse me. Gosh, when you talk a lot, throat sure dries out. My my chair creaks, by the way. Just so you know, it's my chair creaking. Anyway, so what this gives you is it gives you the ability. Let's say you have an addiction to food, for example. Let's say you're overweight and you're sitting there and you start to sense an anxiety. I always forget, excuse me, I always forget to bring this up when I talk about this for some reason. So let me bring it up now. When I'm talking about watching your thoughts and watching your flesh, I don't just mean thoughts. I mean there's a cycle that goes around in your body, and it's thinking, feeling, thinking, feeling, thinking, feeling, or feeling, thinking. Okay, it's hard to discern what starts the process, the thinking or the feeling. It's very hard to, and that's debatable. That's another discussion. But I'm talking about both. So let's come back to the point. So you're sitting there, innocently sitting there, you're overweight, you want to lose weight, suddenly this anxiety comes over you, this need. It's almost like you're in pain. And it's like, oh God, I really want to eat. I really feel like I want to eat something. And it's like, gosh, and now your mind's focused on the food. And now the more you focus on the food, the more you like think about, oh, I shouldn't eat the food. Just thinking about not eating the food is thinking about the food. And it's like, and now you're in this kind of, and now the feeling and the pressure grows. And then you give in. Sooner or later you give in, because that's existing in the lower level of consciousness. You see, anything below this line, this level of consciousness, anything below that is you can't fight it. You can't get out of those things, because the only way out is to raise above the thinking, feeling level of consciousness. Now, when you take your thoughts captive or your feelings captive, let me demonstrate that. I just demonstrated it, how it works with the feeling and the thoughts with the food. Let me demonstrate it from the point of view of having some objectivity to it. Okay, which this meditation is going to give you. Link below. Okay. Anyway, so let's do it again. Okay, gosh, I'm feeling hungry. I can feel the sensation coming up my body, this kind of need, this anxiety feeling, and gosh, I'm really hungry, and then, oh, if I just eat something, and then suddenly you catch yourself. And you're just quiet. You just go quiet because you're watching the feeling in your body. You're watching that feeling, and you're like, quietly, you're not saying anything, but it's almost like, that's a feeling. That's just a feeling. And then your mind's saying, oh, you need the food, oh, you gotta have the food, you're hungry. And then you suddenly look at that thought process, and you can see it's kind of, what's the word? It's irrational. It's like desperate. It's busy and noisy and kind of fast, that thought process. And you can look at that. And in looking at that, a magical thing happens. The moment you catch a feeling or a thought, you don't know how powerful that is. You see, nobody teaches anyone how powerful that moment is. Let me say that again. Nobody is taught how powerful that moment is when you catch the feeling. Let me tell you why it's powerful. The only way that can happen is if you're separate from your flesh and your thoughts, and you're in your spirit. And guess where your spirit is seated? In heavenly places. It says, your spirit is with the Holy Spirit. Your spirit is the kingdom of heaven within you. Your spirit is connected to the spirit of creation, the creator spirit that's all around you. You sit in your spirit with God, quietly observing the carnal human nature, in that moment. Do not ever underestimate the power of that moment. There is power in that moment, because when you're in that moment, you're with God. You're in a high level of consciousness. Now, it doesn't feel like it because it grows. You see, here's what happens. You catch yourself, and then you're off again. You're off in your thoughts. Then you catch it. Oh man, I was off again. And that can happen for a long time. You have to remember, the living from the knowledge of good and evil, carnal mind, the I think therefore I am way of living is all you've ever known your whole life. That's all you've ever known your whole life. It's all you've ever lived from. In my case, I'm 50 years old, 51 maybe, I don't know, somewhere in there. And depending on your age, you could have been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So it's a habit, essentially. It's kind of a habit. That's a good word for it. And it's going to take time. So this meditation, which I urge you to do very strongly, I've spent a long time describing this because I think it's the most powerful thing that you can do. All you do is you do it morning, afternoon, and night. If you can't do it in the afternoon, fine. Morning, make it part of your morning routine. Do it just before going to bed. Okay? And it's 7 minutes long. If you can't spend 7 minutes, it's less time than you spend brushing your teeth and washing your face. It's or making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something. Okay? It's really, really, really short period of time. But your mind, who wants to remain in control because it is the seat of the ego, okay, and that's a whole I haven't even touched on the ego. If you know, maybe you could, maybe I could talk about the ego another time, but it's really, this carnal nature that we have really is the ego, what's known as the ego, okay? And the ego can, and usually is, very, very controlling. It's been in charge. We put it in charge. You know, we're trained to put our ego in charge from a very small age. You know, we're told that we're a name. We're not a name. We're a spirit. That's just what identifies us, but we identify with it. A name is supposed to identify us. We're not supposed to identify with a name. A nationality is supposed to identify us. We're not supposed to identify with the nationality. A skin color and a look just identifies us, like the shape of my face, my eyes. You recognize me. That's what identifies me. I'm not supposed to take my identity from it. Do you see the difference? You see, you know, someone who's very beautiful has great danger because they're very beautiful and they're given a lot of adoration for that, and they can take their identity from the fact that they're beautiful. Okay? See, this is what it's the same as living from the knowledge of good and evil. It's living from a conceptual idea of who you are. That's essentially the ego. Living from a conceptual idea of who you are. So when you start to meditate, you may find that there's a part of you that is like, oh, I don't want to do this. This is painful. This is boring. This is this and that and this and that. So look out for that. That is the ego. Okay? And the ego is very clever. And as I say, I'll talk more about this on another video. The ego plays games. The ego, if you are like really committed to this and you start to meditate and you start to wake up, you start to have those moments where you see your thoughts. The ego is so sneaky because in that moment when you see your thoughts and you go, oh, wow, I see my thoughts. I see that. I see how I was thinking. I see how I was feeling. I could have ended up depressed. If I'd have gone with that thought, I would have been depressed for 3 days. The ego can jump into that moment and say to you, oh, see, you're spiritual now, or you're doing it. Look, you're getting aware. You're getting more aware. Well done. You know, you see, just watch out for that ego. It's just a little tip there. I'm not saying that happened to me. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so that's the end of this section. Now, just give me a moment. There are other things you can do that just kind of help. This is just a minor thing. It's something that is useful, Because the problem is when you go about your day, you're busy, you're working, you're driving, and all that sort of stuff. This just can be helpful for these times. It just helps anchor you in the moment. Now, what we tend to do is we tend to drift off in thought. We tend to, that's the tendency, drift off in thought, thinking about this, sipping our coffee and all that sort of stuff. Very unaware, very low consciousness way of living. So what I want you to do is I want you to kind of practice doing this. You do this with your eyes open. You sit in a room. Now, the human brain is designed to recognize things. So we have a shape recognition, a pattern recognition, color recognition mechanism in our brain. Now, what tends to happen is after a while, when we see the same things in our house, like most people can literally walk around the house in the dark without bumping into things, because they know where everything is. It's like their brain has it all mapped. They don't have to think about it. Okay, there's nothing to think about anymore. And because of that, everything becomes part of the furniture. You can have the most beautiful piece of artwork on the wall, beautiful pictures, and you may actually have had this experience where you don't even notice a picture for weeks, and then suddenly you look at it and you go, wow, I haven't looked at that picture for weeks, and you've walked past it. You may have walked past it 100 times. Okay, but that's the mental process. That's the way the brain is designed to work. But that's really part of the just general living, carnal, sort of lower nature. I don't mean that negatively. And it's not necessarily good, but it's necessary. It's not necessarily good, but it's necessary. We don't want to be information overload, but anyway, let me come to the point. So what I want you to do is just try this. Like, for example, on the wall up here, I have a guitar hanging on the wall. Okay. Now, what we tend to do is, like, as I look at that guitar, okay, the tendency is to say, that's a guitar. And then I'm happy, right? Because I've named it. I've recognized it, named it. It's a guitar. Let's move on. I've done what I need to do. What I want you to do is I want you to kind of pick an object in the room, and I want you to look at it without naming it. I want you to see its shape, see its outline. Don't get lost in it. It's very important. It's just an observation. Look at it without naming it. Look at it, just seeing it for what it is. Just see it for what it is without naming it. Okay, try doing that. Try looking at things, and you'll probably notice in your room you actually start looking at things that you haven't seen for a long time, and just see it. See it for what it is. See it for what it is without letting the brain come in and go, oh, that's a guitar, move on. And it's just a way of slowing you down once again and giving you more of an ability to be observant. Okay, it's like, you ever heard the saying, stop to smell the roses? That's kind of what that saying is talking about. That's kind of what it's talking about, what I'm talking about here. And once again, so what I'm saying is when you're driving, for example, you may be staring at a car in front of you. Just look at the car without naming it, just to be objective to it. See it outside of language. I guess that's one way to put it. You may not understand what I'm talking about at all here, and it's something that will come. The most important part of this is the meditation. As you meditate, you'll experience what I'm talking about. Because really there's a synergistic thing that goes on. Some people can be so carnal. Once again, I don't mean that negatively. It just, who isn't carnal? Who wasn't born into this world? Who wasn't trained in this way of living, this I think therefore I am way of living? Who wasn't? I wasn't. So I don't mean it negatively. But, there's people who have just started on this journey. Now, for you may not know what I'm talking about, and that's fine. It's like judging someone. Like, to be judged for that would be like judging someone who's never ridden a bicycle. A person's never ridden a bicycle. They jump on a bike, fall off, and everyone judges them for it and laughs at them. Okay, that person's got to keep falling off that bike for a while before they can ride it. But then when they ride it, it's natural to them. So that's what I mean. When I say carnal, that's what I mean. Now, coming back to the point, typically if you've been very carnal and that's the only way you've lived, it's the only way you've known, what I'm saying to you may not mean anything. But the meditation is the vehicle to get you there. It's very important. That meditation will get you there. So this is another way to illustrate this concept, and I'm just on my laptop again. And please, if you don't understand any of this, make sure you watch both videos 1 and 2. But this is kind of a metaphor. This is kind of give you an idea of when you're in a lower level of consciousness, when you're caught up in all your thoughts, feelings, and all that sort of stuff. A great metaphor is like it's like being in a river. So you'll see there's the stressful person worrying about time, the person with crazy worrying thoughts all the time, and all these negative thoughts like I hate them, I never have enough, I need a drink. Why did they treat me that way? Why did they say that? Where will I be in 5 years? I feel so depressed. I will eat to feel better. I'm angry. I hate this world. I need some drugs. All these different things, they all exist in this lower stream of consciousness. And it's kind of like, it's like you're in a river and you've got no choice. You're dragged along with the current. You're just dragged along with the current. And in this river, you know, you can be willful, you can fight against these thoughts, you can try all sorts of different techniques and positive thinking techniques and all these different ways. You can go to religion and try and make yourself feel happy and better. You can get yourself a nice relationship with someone. You can eat some nice food. You can buy a nice new car. You can try all these methods, but you're still in the river, caught up and flying along because you never raised your level of consciousness. Now, visually speaking, raising your level of consciousness is like doing this. Instead of being in the river, you raise above the river and you are now on the bank. You're now the observer, the separate observer of all the chaos, all the craziness, all the crazy thoughts and ideas and worries and fears. You're now the observer of all this as the river flows by. And as the river flows by, you just observe these things and they have no effect on you because you're now outside of the stream, so to speak. And that's a great metaphor, and I hope that makes sense to you. Back to the video. Hey there, this is Mark and I'm on my laptop now. And this is a really interesting chart. I found it online. There's actually I'll put the credit to the source of this image below so you can go and get it and look more into it. I believe this chart's being used differently to how I use it, but it's still essentially the same idea. Now what this is, it's kind of a levels of consciousness chart, and you'll see there's kind of a line up the middle, and that's my point all the way through. I've been talking about this all the way through the video. I will be talking about this depending on where I put this video. I'm kind of doing this separately on my laptop and I'm going to edit it in later, so I'm not sure where I'm going to put it. Anyway, come back to the point. You'll see there's a very thick line in the middle, and what that line represents to me is what I've talked about, or what I will talk about, is the carnal nature. It's the lower nature of man, the I think therefore I am, or the living from the knowledge of good and evil mindset, where everything is physical, flesh, thoughts and all that sort of stuff is all you know. If you look below the line, and I'll use my pointer here, if you can see this below the line here, you'll see that it's all different, all the emotions which are pretty negative. Now the idea of this chart is this is kind of a numerical level of consciousness. Okay, now what's very important for me to point out, if I haven't pointed out already, it's something that can't be repeated enough, is that your levels of consciousness is not the driver. The emotions is not the driver. It doesn't come first. You only think it comes first when you live from I think therefore I am. But the truth is that your level of consciousness dictates your emotions. So and it's really a vicious cycle. So when you're in a lower state of consciousness, you can experience these emotions of pride, anger, desire, fear, guilt, apathy, shame, and all those sorts of emotions. Now, those emotions, or those energies, are a manifestation out of the level of consciousness that you're in, but they also keep you in that level of consciousness and feed that level of consciousness. Now, many people, for example, a person may think, well, I'm very prideful, I get angry all the time, I can't stop doing that. And then a religious person comes along and says, okay, you've got to stop being angry, that's bad, that's a sin. And they say, okay, I hear you. And then they try to stop being angry. Okay, I've got to stop being angry, I've got to stop being prideful. And they try, and they use their own will, their own effort, and their own carnal mind. They use the very mind that took on those behaviors to try and fix those behaviors. Well, it's kind of like going to a drug pusher to for lessons on how to get off drugs. It doesn't make sense. The mind is the part of you that's currently flawed in that way, so that you literally cannot stop being angry using willpower and mind games, because it's a low level of consciousness, and the only way to get rid of it, or to get above it, or to get to a place where you can be objective to it, is to raise your consciousness. That's the only way. So it's very important that you realize that all these emotions are a result of your level of consciousness, but they also feed and keep alive the level of consciousness. So there is a certain level of resisting being angry, but it's the way you do it that's important. If you use the mind and the willpower to stop doing it, then you're using the same level of consciousness that got you there to fix it. And it's very frustrating, and it never works. This is why in religion people get very frustrated. They're told not to sin and they keep sinning. They can't stop sinning because they keep using the same level of consciousness to fix the sin that got them in the sin in the first place. It was a low level of consciousness that got them into that in the first place. So learn to raise your level of consciousness, which is on video 2 of this 2-part series on consciousness. Now you'll notice that once you get above the line, you start to move into courage, neutrality. Now, when you're observing, when you see, here's the thing: is you can skip straight into a high level of consciousness just by getting into neutrality. And how you get into neutrality is, as I've taught on video 2, is to be objective and observant of things, therefore separating you from them, because to be the observer you have to be separate. Okay, go through both videos if you don't understand what I just said. I'm not sure where I'm going to edit this video in yet. So, and then once you slowly give up the pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, and all those sorts of things, as they're slowly diminished, things that exist above the line, willingness, acceptance, love, joy, peace, enlightenment, right at the top. Now Jesus would have been at the top and above. Okay, shame is the lowest. You can see shame is the lowest of levels of consciousness. And what does religion do to you very often? Guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame. It's really the lowest level of consciousness that religion tries to hold you in. And it never ends. You get angry, you get prideful, you have a lustful desire, you foul, you sin. They tell you you shouldn't sin, you're a bad person, you're going to go to hell. Here we are back at the bottom. Shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt. And it comes up again. Pride, anger, desire, pride, anger, desire. Fear, apathy, grief. Now grief, that's not referring to losing someone, that's referring to your attitude towards your life. And then a religious person tells you you sinned, you're a bad person. Feel bad about yourself. That's the only way God is going to, forgive you, if you go feel bad about yourself. There you are, back in guilt and shame again. Low level of consciousness. Never ending. Religion, the world, just keeps circling around and round and around. The only way out of this, the only way out of the knowledge of good and evil way of living, The I think, therefore I am carnal level of living is to learn to raise your consciousness. And I talk about that in video 2. Okay, that's it. This is this chart, just to give you an idea. Key points. Remember that your level of consciousness manifests these things, and these things manifest your level of consciousness. It's a loop. But the only way out is to become objective and step above the line. That's it. So thank you very much for listening to this part 2, and this is Mark signing out. And don't forget, once again, please like the video, comment, please subscribe, please hit the bell notification. All this stuff is completely free to you, but it helps me reach more people. And thanks once again, and I'll see you in future videos. And yeah, as I say, please ask questions. I'm really happy to converse with you on YouTube. Or if you want to find me on Facebook, let's discuss it over there as well. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Bye.